The observation deck of the Imperial Felician flagship Whisper of Eternity had never been designed for moments like this. Lady Serapha lay upon the crystalline medical platform, her silver-striped fur dulled to ash, her breathing shallow and labored. Around her stood the entirety of the royal family, 7 generations of the most powerful bloodline in the Felician Empire, their elongated ears pressed flat against their heads in mourning. Jax wiped grease from his hands onto his already filthy coveralls. Completely unaware of the cultural catastrophe he was about to commit, he'd been called to the flagship to repair a malfunctioning gravity stabilizer in the lower decks. Standard work for a human mechanic operating out of Nexus Station. Nobody had told him that the entire Felician royal court was aboard. Nobody had mentioned that their beloved matriarch was dying. And certainly, nobody had warned him about the ancient taboos regarding physical contact with nobility. The environmental controls in the medical bay, a young Felician officer had said, her whiskers twitching with barely contained distress. They're failing. We need them operational immediately. Jax had shouldered his toolkit and followed without question. Humans had a reputation in this sector of space. Reliable, adaptable, and refreshingly unburdened by the complex social hierarchies that paralyzed most species during emergencies. The medical bay was a cathedral of grief. Jax barely registered the crowd of elegantly robed Felicians before his attention locked onto the environmental control panel embedded in the far wall. Diagnostic readings scrolled across his handheld scanner. Coolant leak, primary circuit overload, backup systems unresponsive. Fixable, but he'd need to work fast. He moved through the room with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd spent 20 years keeping dying ships and stations alive. The Felicians parted before him like water, their large luminous eyes tracking his every movement with a mixture of hope and something else, something that looked almost like horror. Lady Serapha's breathing grew more ragged. Even from across the room, Jax could see the pale blue of her lips, the tremor in her elegant fingers. The environmental failure wasn't just inconvenient. At her age and in her condition, the rising temperature and dropping oxygen levels were actively killing her. Stand clear, Jax muttered, pulling open the panel and exposing a nest of burnt wiring. His hands moved with mechanical precision, bypassing damaged circuits, rerouting power flows. Sweat beaded on his forehead as the temperature climbed past 35 degrees Celsius. A sharp gasp rippled through the assembled royalty. Jax glanced back. Lady Serapha had gone completely still, her chest no longer rising. A younger Felician, probably her daughter, judging by the similar stripe pattern, released a keening wail that made Jax's teeth ache. No, 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 he growled, abandoning the panel. His EMT training from his colony days kicked in before conscious thought could intervene. He crossed to the medical platform in 3 strides, his scanner already analyzing Serapha's vital signs. Cardiac arrest, respiratory failure, 90 seconds, maybe less, before irreversible brain damage. The crowd of Felicians seemed to freeze, their mouths open in silent shock as Jax placed his bare, grease-stained hand directly on Lady Serapha's chest. In Felician culture, touching royalty without permission was an offense punishable by exile. Touching the dying matriarch, the living embodiment of their ancestral line, was sacrilege beyond measure. Jax didn't know any of this. He only knew that a living being was dying in front of him, and he had the skills to help. "Somebody get me a defibrillator," he barked, beginning chest compressions. His hands pressed down in steady rhythm. 30 compressions, position check, another 30. Lady Serapha's body was lighter than a human's, her bone structure more delicate. He adjusted his pressure, praying he wasn't causing more damage. Nobody moved. The Felicians stood paralyzed, caught between the trained instinct to protect their matriarch and the overwhelming taboo of what they were witnessing. "Now," Jax roared, the command in his voice finally breaking through their shock. That a medical officer stumbled forward with a device that looked nothing like any defibrillator Jax had ever seen, but the principle had to be similar. He grabbed it, found what he hoped were the activation controls, and pressed the charged plates to Serapha's chest. Her body arched. The monitoring crystals around the platform flared from deep purple to amber. Nothing. Jax repositioned and tried again. This time, the crystals blazed gold. Lady Serapha's eyes snapped open, vertical pupils dilating wide as she drew in a deep, shuddering breath. The silver in her fur seemed to brighten, color flooding back into her face. She stared up at Jax with an expression of complete bewilderment. "What?" she whispered, her voice like whined through autumn leaves. "What did you do?" Jax stepped back, finally registering the dozens of eyes fixed on him with expressions ranging from awe to outrage. CPR? Basic emergency medicine? You were in cardiac arrest." The youngest member of the royal family, a kid barely into adolescence, broke the stunned silence. He touched the matriarch. The human touched her. With his bare hands, another voice added, scandalized. During the passing ceremony, Jax raised his hands defensively, suddenly very aware that he might have just committed a serious diplomatic incident. "Look, I'm sorry if I broke some rule, but she was dying." "I couldn't just. She was dying," Lady Serapha interrupted, pushing herself into a sitting position with surprising strength. "And now she is not." Her gaze swept across her family, sharp and commanding despite her ordeal. Because this human valued life over protocol. An older male Felician stepped forward, his robes marking him as someone of significant rank. "Matriarch, the transgression was necessary," Serapha said firmly. She looked down at her chest where Jax's hands had been, then back at the mechanic with something that might have been respect. "Tell me, human, do your people often defy sacred law to save strangers?" Jax shrugged uncomfortably. "We don't really think of it as defying law. Where I come from, if someone needs help and you can give it, you help. That's all." A ripple of whispered conversation spread through the assembly. Lady Serapha tilted her head, her ears swiveling forward in a gesture Jax had learned meant intense interest. "No consideration for rank," she pressed. "For propriety? For the consequences to yourself? Not when someone's life is on the line," Jax confirmed. "That stuff comes after. If there is an after." Lady Serapha was quiet for a long moment, her tail curling thoughtfully around her feet. Then she began to laugh, a rich, warm sound that seemed to transform the entire room. 300 years, she said, I have lived among my people. 300 years of ceremony and tradition and carefully maintained distance. And it takes a grease-stained human mechanic to remind me what matters most." She extended her hand toward Jax, a gesture heavy with significance that he couldn't begin to understand. "Jax of the humans, you have given me more than my life. You have given me clarity." Hesitantly, Jax took her hand. Her fur was impossibly soft, her grip surprisingly strong. "The environmental controls are still broken," he said. Because he genuinely didn't know what else to say, that Serapha's laugh came again, joined by tentative chuckles from the assembled royalty. "Then perhaps you should fix them, mechanic. But first," she glanced at her family, her expression turning serious. "Let it be recorded that on this day, a human named Jax demonstrated the principle upon which our empire was supposedly founded, that all life is precious, and that compassion outweighs protocol." She squeezed his hand once more before releasing it. "We have much to learn from your species, I think." Jax returned to the environmental panel, acutely aware of dozens of eyes still watching him. As he reconnected the final circuits and the temperature began to drop back to comfortable levels, he caught fragments of whispered conversation behind him. "Changed everything. The old laws? Perhaps the humans are right." He didn't understand most of it. He was just a mechanic who'd done what any decent person would do. But as he packed up his tools and prepared to leave, Lady Serapha called out to him one final time. "Jax, the Felician Empire does not forget its debts. We will speak again." It wasn't a threat. It was a promise, and somehow,